Welcome to the Paru Zings, Appraisers on Purpose podcast. This podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? And what do they do now for their teams, their clients, and the industry? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Well, welcome back, and thanks again for joining us. We're excited in this week's installment to have Tom Munizzo with us. It is always a pleasure to connect with a peer who has just a broad range of experience in and around the industry, as it provides a whole different perspective for so many who either are not in the industry or have been in just one particular segment of the industry. So with that, Tom, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Appreciate it. Maybe it's springtime showing up in this part of the country, so you and I happen to be practically neighbors, so I hope there's sunshine flying in your window as well as mine.
Yeah, nice day today.
Nice day. Hopefully that brings up all that activity out there and brings down interest rates and things start moving a little faster than they had been in the past.
Yeah, I think you, myself, and everybody else in our space is hoping the same thing.
Oh, well, goodness. Well, Tom, we always like to start out with just a fascinating question is, so were you born this way or did you find your way into the industry?
I guess one hand I was born into it, but didn't want to be born into it. No, I'm actually a third generation appraiser. My grandfather was an appraiser. My dad was an appraiser. My uncle have tons of family and relatives who are appraisers, and I never wanted to be an appraiser. But reluctantly, my dad dragged me when I was junior in high school in 1977 and said, hey, come to this appraisal class with me. And I still remember it. It was at the Hillside Holiday Inn, and it was a class being given by Fannie Mae. Still remember the director's name who ran the Chicago area, and they were given a class estimating contributory value for REO properties.
Oh.
It was interesting. I was, only 17, and all the other appraisers in there were a lot older, in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so they were all kind of looking at my dad, why'd you bring this kid here to the class? So long story short, I still have the piece of paper. I wrote down this formula that they were teaching because Fannie Mae was getting tired of seeing appraisers making condition adjustments on their REO properties based off of the actual dollar amount without estimating the contributory value. So I still have it, and over the years it's become very useful. I was actually, at that time, as soon as I graduated high school, I went into computers. So I worked down at the Board of Trade.
Oh, wow.
And I was computer analyst. And so that's what I was doing. And I really enjoyed doing that and had no desire to be an appraiser.
You're not the first person who's been around the family experience, Tom, and had some of that, like, I don't really want to do that. But somehow you got into the industry. What happened? As Bugs Bunny would say, did you take a wrong turn at Albuquerque?
Well, back as soon as I started driving, so when I was 16, even though I didn't want to be an appraiser, my dad was subconsciously grooming me to be an appraiser. Every Saturday morning, he'd have a list of properties, residential, commercial, industrial, and he'd say, all right, I want you to drive to all these properties, take a front, rear, street scene, all sides, any repairs, pictures of repairs. Write me a paragraph of what do you see, what's in front of the building, what's around it, what's the neighborhood look like, and then I need you to measure all the commercial and industrial properties, because back then they didn't really give square footage with the data sources that they had back at the time, and my dad would pay me $5 for a residential property and $10 for an industrial or commercial. So think you're 16, 17, 18 years old on a Saturday. Your dad gives you a list of 30 properties.
Yeah.
That's $200 to $300 every Saturday that you make. That's high-end money for a teenager,
Yes.
So started doing that, and then I was working in computers, and my dad called me up one year, and he says, how much money do you make? And I says, I make $24,000. He says, oh, that's too much money. I could pay you like $21,000. Why don't you come work for me now? And I'm like, that's all right, Dad. So about 6 months later, he calls me back. He says, how much money do you make now? I said, I think 26,000, a couple more thousand than what I just said. And he says, well, I could pay you 24. I'm like, no, thanks. And so this went on for about a year and a half. Finally, my dad calls me up and he says, how much money do you make? And I said, $34,000. And he says, well, I can only pay you 30,000. And so he was really mad at me. And it was just happened to be coincidentally about a month or two later, I just got passed over for a data center manager for where I worked. That was in 1986. And I was only 26 years old. And the VP of Ops calls me in his office and says, I'm sorry, Tom, we're going to have to pass you up. You know, you don't have a college degree and you're only 26 years old. And I'm like,
What does that matter?
you don't have to have a college degree to do this job. I've been here 6 years. I know exactly how to run that data center. But you're saying I didn't get the job? Well, I'm going to give you my 2 weeks notice. And he says, your 2 weeks notice? And I said, yeah, you made my decision real easy for me. My dad's been trying to get me to become an appraiser for the last few years, and I really like my job here, and I keep telling him no. So I'm going to give you my 2 weeks notice, and I'm going to be an appraiser. And he says, well, if someone gave you another offer, he's thinking that I'm kind of bullshitting him, that I'm not having to be an appraiser. He's like, if some other company offered you an ops support role, I'll match it. I says, no, I'm officially retiring. And he says, retiring? He says, I'm retiring from this industry. I'm going to become a real estate appraiser. So that was a really great exit interview with that person. I left there. I called my dad up and I'm like, well, I just quit my job. And he's like, well, how much money do you make? And I told him $36,000. He says, well, you're lucky. I just got in a new client and I can pay you that. And you know what his new client was?
No, I do not.
This goes back here. You have to be around for a long time so even some of the listeners here, but it was one of the very first appraisal management companies. It was Lenders Service out of the Pittsburgh area. So I started working with my dad June of 86. And that was a big account for us. The rest kind of career paths kind of moves on from there.
That's amazing, Tom. I mean, there's not many people at that ripe age of their middle 20s get to retire, and you did. I mean, but you didn't stay retired for very long. Like you said, you moved from one industry in the computer science space over to the other, which was joining your dad in the family firm. What was it like working in a family appraisal firm?
Well, my dad and his secretary, they were been together for over 25 years. In 86, they still had files of the old Green Hornet form around, and they were, the earliest versions of the 1004 form was out, but they were doing a lot of this stuff with carbon paper and old IBM typewriter. And I just came from computers, and I'm like, "What are you guys doing here? We need to get a computer." And my dad was so reluctant. And long story short, because of my computer background,
sure,
in less than a 2-year period, I had the entire office automated with Zenith XT and AT computers on a server that was trying to emulate an OS environment, just using connections in the office, working through DOS. So that's what we were doing. And we had about, in 88 or 89, we had like 13 or 14 full-time appraisers all working on computers. From there to like 1991, 92, we got FHA review contract, which was really sweet. That helped me really grow the family operation at that time.
That's amazing.
Used to go down to Fannie Mae office downtown Chicago and pick up a couple hundred FHA appraisals every month, and I'd divvy them out to my appraisers, and we would do the reviews. I'd review them all, and then we would drop them back off at the end of the month. So we had like almost a full month, doing a couple hundred of them, and we drop them back off. That was a great gig.
That is indeed a great gig. Now, you touched on one thing that many people in the industry are familiar with, but there's a lot of people that are not. And you mentioned the Green Hornet. You want to take a moment or two and just kind of, for those that maybe had joined the profession maybe in the last decade or 2 decades, maybe even 3 for that matter, don't know what you're talking about.
Well, the Green Hornet used to be a one-page appraisal form that really that had everything on it. It had basically a cost approach section, a neighborhood section. It came out in the 60s. That was the primarily form that residential appraisals were done on. It basically had like 4 or 5 sections of it. Well, I think it was, 10 or 11, 12 sections, counting the first page and the back page.
Okay.
So imagine today you're doing your 1004 and you got your sketch and you got your pictures and you have your addendums and you got your certifications and limiting conditions. Think how it would be if you just had a 2-page form and you stuck a Polaroid picture of the front of the house on it. That's it. And so anyway, they eventually got rid of that, in the 70s. I think it was. I'm not sure exactly when they eliminated that form.
Yeah, I get it. But the point being is at a very, very early intersection of maybe people might be thinking more of a Flintstones type of use of a form and carbon copies. You come in like the Jetsons and put together some Zenith machines and create and simulate an operating system and connected workstations for efficiency and effectiveness.
Yeah, and who knew a lot about, who could talk about the Green Hornet form is George Opelka. George originally hailed from the Chicagoland area, and his dad was an appraiser. Now, George wasn't really an appraiser, but George and his family, they started out the SREA books. They were red books that appraisers, because we couldn't get the MLS data because we weren't realtors. So appraisers had to start their own comp database, and it was these red books called the SREA books. And George used to come in. George and his dad would come into our office, Munizzo Real Estate and Appraisal on 31st in Chicago. George's dad got introduced to my dad, and then vice versa. And me and George, we were both the young kids working for our dads.
Sure.
And he went the technology side. I stayed on the appraisal side. And to this day, me and George, we've had a 40-year plus.
Wow,
might even be longer than 40 years. Yeah, it's longer. 45-year relationship that all started as a result of our fathers and how we got connected together. And so if you were an appraisal company, you would take the front sheet of all of your appraisal reports, and then you would send them over to George in the red books. And then by city and zip code, they would put list in your properties that you appraised with all the other appraisers in the area. And that's how we got our comps back then.
That is absolutely phenomenal. And thank you for a bit of the history. I actually have heard a good bit of it in conversations with George over the years, as well as others. And it's quite a telling tale, and I hope at some point in the future we get to hear a little bit more about it. But so here you go. You network and connect an office of appraisers, and you're doing review work. How did things continue to grow from there, from the late 80s going into the 90s for you guys?
Well, the 90s were real well, because now we grew our staff. We had about 30 staff appraisers. One of the challenges that we had, like all growing firms, is, learning what the client expectations are and how to deal with them. And, everybody, anytime you work with an appraisal management company, you get revision requests.
No, and you had those back then too? My goodness.
Yeah, so that's a dreaded word. I'm telling you, I see the same revision request now in 2020s that I saw in the 1980s and the 1990s.
Oh, geez.
There's like this magical checklist that has never been sunset, and everybody uses them, and it's been passed down from generations and generations, and now everybody has some variation of it. So one of the things that I did for the firm was I went to the mortgage brokers trade show, and that's where everybody would have. That's where title companies and lenders and banks and home inspectors and mortgage brokers, everybody would go there. And I was the first appraisal firm to ever rent a booth. The response was every broker, every person come up, I'm tired of these lowball appraisals. I'm tired of this. So it introduced us to a lot of folks, and we were able to really grow the business. One of the booths that was by me was private mortgage insurance, PMI, and that was the group where they trained underwriters. So I asked the gal, I said, how to become an underwriter? She says, well, you have to take these classes. Our company gives them. And I'm like, didn't you send me the information? So I got the information, and I actually signed up to take underwriting classes. So I took basically underwriting 101 and 102 and advanced underwriting.
Yeah.
And when I showed up, and it was at night, like 2 or 3 times a week for like a 4 or 6 week program. I don't really remember now. After everybody introduces themselves, and what do you do? I says, I'm an appraiser. And they were like, you're an appraiser? What are you doing in underwriting classes? I says, I'm tired of getting revisions on our appraisals. I want to learn what you guys are looking for. That was the start of an interesting time period for us, because not only myself became an underwriter, even though I never underwrote any loans, but I sent like 5 or 6 of my main appraisers to it. And then I'll never forget, we get to the chapter 8, which is the appraisal section and underwriting class.
Yes.
And I walk in that day and says, well, guess who's teaching this chapter? Tom, you get to teach. So they deferred to me in the appraisal chapter, because they wanted to know what appraisers think like and how we write our appraisals. So we did that for a while, and we grew the company to the point where in the late 90s, we consistently had a $1.5 million company for a residential firm.
Congratulations.
We did do some commercial, but mostly it was residential, and generated some interest. There was a bank who was getting acquired by another bank in the area. They came in and they started pitching me to sell the appraisal company to them.
Oh, wow.
So after about a year of negotiations in 99, we sold the family appraisal company to Charter One Bank, who just acquired St. Paul Federal in Chicago. And the beauty of it was that I got to go work for the bank and take all the appraisers who work for us. And as staff appraisers with benefits and everything, it was a great thing.
That's fantastic. Well, congratulations. That's quite a change, though. As you said, growing the family business and then becoming part of an acquisitive action. And how'd it go working for somebody else?
Well, you know what? Now, my dad never came along. He kept, but the ironic part was he had to, Munizzo Real Estate and Appraisal Company became property of the bank in the sale. So he had to use just his name for an appraisal company. So him and one of the commercial appraisers never came on board, but the rest of us all did. This is when you learn about Graham Leach Bliley, fair lending,
wow.
and discrimination. And now you're part of a bank and you have to dress this way. This is the company policy for this, and this is how we do. You have to do performance reviews. So it was a great experience for me, because I learned the inner workings of working at a bank and a lending institution. And so I liked it. And what was really neat about it was at Charter One Bank, their appraisal subsidiary was Reach, Real Estate Appraisal Services, and they had a very good relationship with F&C at the time. And F&C was a growing company, and they were one of the primary founders of the collateral management system, CMS. And this is how you could manage appraisal volume if you were a large company or a bank or a lending institution. And so I was fortunate to be able to work with them and various reps over at their company who would come in, and they'd be developing review rules for 1004s and for the appraisal forms. And so I got to work on all of that stuff and learn all about the different appraisal technology that was out there. So that was really sweet. And then AIDC came in, and which was going to be the Appraisal Institute's direct connection on their commercial technology platform. So I got to work on that for a couple of years. And so it was great experience, and it was the best job that I ever had. I really enjoyed working for them. And then in 2006, a large bank came in, acquired Charter One Bank. They just had a different way of doing business. And to make a long story short, they basically let go the only profitable subsidiary of the existing bank and brought in their own people to run things. I found myself out of a job in 2006.
What an interesting time to be out of a job, 2006.
Yeah, no, it was kind of a very depressing time period when I found myself, just laid off of my best job I ever had and not knowing what I was going to do. So, and then all of a sudden, I got a call from a old buddy of mine, actually one of my mentors, Brad Ellis. He used to be from the Chicagoland area, and he relocated out of California, Pasadena area. And he calls me up one day. He says, "Hey, what are you doing?" I says, "Well, I'm sitting at my makeshift desk in the basement," because at that time, all my kids were at home. So now in my room, this is my son's bedroom that I converted to an office. But back in '86, it was a folding table, a computer screen, and a chair and a fax machine. And that was my office and my desk. And he calls me up. He says, "So what are you doing?" I says, "Well, I'm sitting at my desk. Mainly, I've been doing golfing and twiddling my thumbs." He says, "How'd you like to come work for me?" I says, "Doing what?" And he says, "Investigating fraud on appraisals." I said, "Really?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "Why don't you fly out here to Pasadena and let me show you and tell you all about it." So I did that. I went out there. So I took a job with IndyMac Bank literally in 2 months after getting let go from Charter One.
That's amazing timing, and it shows the power of relationships, as well as, to your credit, you had invested, as Warren Buffett says, the best investment you can make is developing your own skills and competencies, because those always can pay dividends. And here you were working with IndyMac. Did you get to go to Pasadena, or did you actually early on pioneer the remote work?
Well, it was yes on both of them. So I went out there and I trained for a few weeks in Pasadena, and then I got back. I was able to work remote right here out of the house. It was really neat.
That's an amazing experience. There you are in the 2000s working remote with what was a large presence and one that was growing significantly at that point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. This job, opened me up to a whole new other avenue of what forensic reviews were all about, and the difference between pre-funding reviews and post-funding reviews, and how you work with the REO department, how you work with the chief credit risk officer, how you work with the various committee structure that's within a lending institution. So yeah, I like that job too.
That's fantastic. And again, because of your broad experience, you've touched on a few things that not everyone may be familiar with. What's the difference between a pre-funding review and a post-funding review?
Well, pre-funding is you get an appraisal and you're looking at, and they haven't closed the loan yet. So you're basically doing a review prior to it going to underwriting. And you're looking for, and then you're asking for revisions to the appraiser, have them correct the revisions. You get the revised report. You give it a thumbs up, thumbs down. Thumbs up goes to underwriting. Thumbs down, maybe they'll order another appraisal. Maybe it'll go to committee for performance review. Versus post-closing is these were loans that were already closed. And that was the main reason that for my position. And so any loan that took more than a $250,000 loss got red flagged by various departments in the bank. They wanted to know, why did this loan default for X amount of dollars? Was it because the people weren't qualified? Were they not credit worthy? Was it because of the collateral? If it was part of the collateral, what were the reasons why the loan defaulted? Did we have a bad appraisal, or was there actual fraud involved? So I get there, I'm there for a couple of months, and then I get a call. Brad says, "I'm sending you a group of appraisals in Houston. All these were flagged as high loss loans, possibly fraudulent. So this is what I need you to do. Call this guy up in Houston, and maybe he can help you out with MLS data." So he gives me the guy's name. Happens to be Frank Luco, and Frank's a pretty popular, well-known, experienced member down in Houston. And I call him up, introduce myself. He's like, "Sure, come on down. Here's my address. I'll have everything that you need for you." And I walk in his office, and he had folders on each one of these high-rise condominium building. He had everything that was there, all the records, nice map showing me where everything was. And that was, when you go to another area that you're not really geographically competent with, it's good or you don't have access to the data, it's good that you find a local expert and they put everything together for you. It was amazing. I'd go to these high-rise, I'd pretend that I'm a potential purchaser for one of their units and make an appointment and go in there and say, I want to buy this unit or this unit, whatever information I could find out that was in relationship to the units that were used either as a subject or the comparables in the appraisals that defaulted in that project. That was very challenging. You had to keep straight face. You had to pretend like you were someone who had the monetary means to purchase those high-end luxury condominiums. And then you'd get into the model, and then I'd say, so it says it's 3,000 square feet. And I said, can I see your layout? Can I see your sketch? And what you'd find out is a lot of times is they would include the balconies on the outside and add in that 400 square foot balcony and say it's 3,000 square foot when the unit only had 2,600. Or they say that it included 2 deeded parking spaces, but you could never see the deeds to them. They would never show you the parking spaces. It would tell you they had all these amenities in the building, but they didn't, and you could never look at any of the units. So get as much information as I can. I'd come back, and then I would do my analysis, send it back to the committee, and then legal at the bank would take it from there. But I just enjoy doing that. I mean, there's a lot more from new subdivision developer fraud to property flipping fraud to other stuff like that.
Absolutely fascinating to get that type of insight. And really, for your benefit, I mean, you just become that much better a professional because you've got the exposure, you're connecting all the pieces, you've done underwriter training in the background, to get to that point. And once again, you said it sounded like, I think I heard you say that it was something you really enjoyed, and sounds like that didn't last forever.
That's kind of like the story of my career here. Every time I'm going to get in these jobs that I really love what I'm doing, something unexpected happens. And so here was in 2008. Only been doing this for 2 years. All of a sudden, Indy McBake comes in and they get shut down by the FDIC for whatever reasons. It was terrible because coming from an appraiser's perspective, from a review appraiser perspective, we had the greatest review program set up at the bank. We had a very high-end, large pre-funding staff appraiser model that reviewed every appraisal, and then we had the whole post-production QC model. We worked well. We had all these policies and procedures in place, and then to find out that the bank you're working for gets shut down by the FDIC, it was very disheartening. But to the best of my recollection, primarily it wasn't due to bad appraisals. It was primarily due to all those goofy loans that they were doing in 2006 to 2008. Those teaser loans, putting on people that shouldn't have been in there were getting qualified. But I don't know any specifics on that. But
no, you weren't on the origination side. You were on in a sense, QC, somewhere in the middle or towards the end or after the end of the process.
Yeah, so that was the end of that great gig. So happened just about at that time. I was around that time I was national president for NAIFA, National Association Independent Fee Appraisers, and I was doing a lot of trade shows and manning the booth, trying to recruit members and stuff over there. And I happened to be, I think it was in San Antonio, and it was one of Joan Trice's earlier Vail conferences that she had down there, and I'm in the booth. You talk to the other people who run the booths over there. And so I go up, and there's a booth for IRR residential. I'm talking to the guy, and we're talking, and I'm like, did you just get this job? He says, yeah, I just got hired like 2 months ago. And I said, funny. I says, you must be the guy they hired because I interviewed for that job myself about 3 or 4 months ago. And he says, no kidding. And so we started laughing. that just shows you
Yes.
how small it is, what a small
Yes.
space it is. So we exchanged pleasantries. I gave him my card and stuff. And, about a month later, I get a phone call from him. He says, "Hey, you didn't tell me you used to work for the chief appraiser at Charter One Bank." I says, "Well, you never asked me, and I never really told you where I used to work." And he says, "Well, he was the gentleman who our parent firm, Integra, consulted with to start the residential franchise division for Integra." And I'm like, "No kidding." And he's like, "Yeah." He says, "Why don't you come down here? We're looking for a chief appraiser." So I flew out to Kansas City. I did get hired. I was hired by the one of the founders of Integra in Kansas City, and came on board. Now, this was kind of like a semi-remote position, because in this one, I'd fly out Monday morning and I'd fly home Thursday night. And so I worked at a desk there, most of the week. And I did that for a while, for a couple years. And then it started going down to every other week, and then, a week, a month. And the more that I wasn't able to run things from my end. And so that was, I enjoyed that as well. And I've been there ever since. Except our firm has changed multiple times since then to where we're now Acurity consolidated. But now I haven't had anything to do with the company, from a leadership role for a long time. I kind of consider myself the man behind the curtain, the old guy behind the curtain, who just kind of the keeper of the history since 2008 to 2023.
Hey, that's important. And really, you've touched on one of the core reasons why we put all this together is because there is individuals like you, that man behind the curtain, that wizard back there, that most people will never get to connect with, and they may never interact with, but they can at least learn from. And this at least kind of in a more old-fashioned tradition, a bit of an oral tradition to pass along knowledge and experience and learnings. And that is fantastic, Tom. So, Tom, I never thought of you as the man behind the curtain, but again, that's a fantastic description of how much you've been involved in, how much you've seen, and how much you've contributed to. Given this another great experience that you've had, what's next?
Well, I just finished writing a appraisal class, best practice and most common errors, deficiencies, and I'm going to be teaching that April 19th at the ASA Real Property Conference in Atlantic City.
Atlantic City. So for those that are needing some travel, they can go ahead and start planning ahead and pick up some continuing education or just life education along the way.
Yeah, excellent. So I remember earlier you were asking about if there's something that you knew way back when that you thought would be beneficial in sharing. And so I kind of want to go back to a couple things.
Yeah, please do.
As far as, and also what I know now for opportunities for appraisers. I want to go back, and I can't reiterate enough now about why an appraiser wants to join to a professional appraisal organization, because what networking is all about, and it's how you meet other appraisers, it's how you have good conversations, you learn from one another here. I would not have ever known Brad Ellis. I would not have known most of the people in my career if I wasn't part of an appraisal association. Unfortunately, we've had multiple generations of appraisers now who they've never even taken appraisal class in front of people. It's all been online training. A lot of the appraisers are only taking their mandatory minimum requirements to become licensed or a certified appraiser. But back in the day, and even till this day, it was common practice to show up in person to an appraisal class and walk into an appraisal class with 20, 30, 50, maybe even 100 or 150 other fellow appraisers in there who are all located from your area. Attend a trade show where there could be 500 to 1,000 appraisers from across country in there, or attend local chapter meetings. So many opportunities have presented themselves, potential business, existing business. And so if I had any recommendation, I would strongly encourage folks to join an appraisal association such as the American Society of Appraisers, the Appraisal Institute. If you're in the agricultural or farm ranch managers, that's what it's all about for that networking over thing. And even to this day, with almost 40 years experience with myself, I just got done as Chicago chapter president for ASA, just meeting individual appraisers who are business appraisers, machinery and equipment appraisers, art appraisers, personal property appraisers, has really opened up my eye. I mean, if I would have known now back then, I would have definitely probably been a business valuation appraiser or a machinery and equipment appraiser. There's a guy, Fernando, who's the current Chicago chapter president of ASA. He travels all around the world.
Well, in light of all that, Tom, if you just kind of take stock of such a broad education, a lot of relationships developed over time through getting involved in associations, is there anything or what thing or many things or anything at all that you may be looking forward to about the future or even be excited about if there's something would such exist?
I think that right now there's a big challenge because of this latest slowdown, the technology changes that are taking place, all this likely new legislation, rules and regulations as it pertains to the lending industry, title, real estate appraisers, racial bias, unconscious bias, discrimination. It just seems right now that the day-to-day appraiser really has challenging times for him. You're going to really have to decide whether or not you want to stick with being a residential appraiser. That's why I was saying earlier, if I would have known now earlier in my career, I would have probably gone into business valuation or machinery and equipment, because you don't have to deal with, all these other issues that are taking place right now. But the one thing that makes me the most excited is in my current role is getting to help appraisers that, work for our firm. And then the many appraisers who just call me on a regular or email me on a regular basis and just who I've known and networked over the years, and they ask me questions and, they have, how would you handle this? How should I accept this appraisal assignment? Can you help me with this appraisal assignment? And, that's what keeps me going right now. I mean, like I said earlier, I just finished writing this best practice revisions class. God, there was so much information to be put together there. I had to step back from it 2 or 3 times and then pick back up just so I could get a good flow on the material. But looking back over 40 years and looking into the future here, I'm excited to see what Consolidated is doing, and I'm excited to see that there's avenues for appraisers. But if you don't diversify and you don't learn a different skill set, all you want to do are 1004 refinance appraisals, I think you might as well hang it up and retire, because I just don't see a future for that too much longer.
I think that's a great point, Tom. But it highlights an interesting thing. 2 things you touched on a little earlier. One was there was a point in time when an older individual brought a younger individual into a group of individuals, and it kind of seems like the roles have changed. Maybe you're that senior individual now has an opportunity to bring a younger individual in and connect them around. What would you encourage them to focus on upon being either new or maybe recent in the profession to really hone their skills and establish themselves?
Yeah, well, you bring up a good point there. I am happy to say that for the first time in 20 years or 25 years, I brought 2 trainees on.
Oh, wow.
And I have trained them into where both of them have just become licensed appraisers, and one has, and they're both ready to upgrade to a certified appraiser. It's very humbling. You have to go back out. And here's the ironic part. I'm training them. What am I training them with? I have a rotor wheel to measure the property, but I made them get the distos, and so they have the laser cameras. So here's the 2 new appraisers with the new technology and doing everything on the iPad, right? And here I am with a sheet of paper with my notebook and a rotor wheel. Okay,
I love it.
Not that I don't want to learn the technology. I know the technology, because our company uses it. But you can't, if you're going to be a new appraiser, you have to embrace the technology, and that's where it is. And I think you can draw a good analogy there for us appraisers who've been around 30, 40, 50 years.
Sure.
We're so set in our ways that we can do an appraisal quicker than most people can, just using the way that we have been doing it for many years, as opposed to forcing ourselves to use the new technology so we can get those reports out in a quicker and a faster manner. So, but that's what the challenge is, we have a number of appraisers who are retiring, especially now due to the current state of the industry and the profession, but it's a great opportunity to bring in young appraisers and to train them. I can't tell you, with the company I work for, we have lots of appraisers, and I help them every day. I get a question about one thing or another. I have to look at all potential applicants when they come in. I look at their samples and see what they're all about, or I get the phone call from just an individual who wants to become an appraiser and they haven't been able to get anywhere, and they're looking for somebody to train them and mentor them. So you're right. From my father and bringing me in when I was 17 in front of all the older generation appraisers to now, yeah, I am. The roles have certainly reversed, and that's why it's kind of important to have some folks with our skill set and experience and historical background around to help groom, train, mentor new appraisers, or even the appraisers who came in who have never been part of an organization or attended a class in person, to help, give them that necessary guidance and leadership.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic, and it's wonderful to see you ascending into that role as you've been really groomed for your whole life. One interesting thing that not many people would get a chance to speak to can talk about, but because you retired early on, you might be the first person we've talked to who has some generational experience and has retired once already, but you also spent time in and around the computer industry and, by your own admission, had built some systems before. How do you see the future evolving with so many more young people being technology proficient, coding specific? I can't tell the number of times I've been in a conversation with people of certain generations like, oh yeah, I'm just going to stay up tonight and code that. And they literally create something into existence. What's your outlook on the future because of that ability that exists more naturally in young people in the environment they're coming up with, because you actually have some education in that area?
That's probably the exciting part, because principle change says nothing ever remains static, especially in the technology space. And like I said earlier, I was trying to emulate an OS system with using, they used to call them
Zenith and DOS,
AT and
sure.
XT PCs. And this was really badass back then. Hey, a 20 meg floppy drive, not 20 meg hard drive, using a 5.5 inch floppy drive on there. Me and my buddy, we actually built a box. And this was because I was talking, and he was going to DeVry Tech. He was an electronics guy and a programmer. And I had some programming in me as well. And I says, you know what? I want to work at my appraisals at home, but we leave the office and we shut off all the computers. How can I access my file that's on this 20 meg hard drive in the office? So we built a switch box. And remember the old phone modems where you take the phone and put it and make that noise?
Yeah.
Where it would and if we left the server on, what would happen is it would actually go in there, and on my dumb AT computer monitor at home, I could access my file remotely, pull it up, and work on it.
Wow. Man, you and Steve Jobs were like in sync. He just happened to do something called Apple, and you did appraisal. I mean, you had the APs together.
Yeah, but who knew? If I knew now, if I would have stayed with that stuff, I'd probably be a multi-millionaire over on the technology, but it was the appraisal side. And so now when you see all the changes and all the young folks coming in, so I could tell you that every place I've ever worked at, there's always been younger individuals who are just so smart with that coding. We'll be in a meeting and we'll be like, well, we would like to do this. Is there any possible way we'll talk to our IT guy or our tech guy? Yeah, sure. Give me a couple of days. And they'll all of a sudden, next meeting, they have it all done.
Wow.
And we're testing it out. And it's from analyzing thousands of files and crunching the data that way to writing a better way to disseminate data or distribute it throughout the company.
Sure.
I mean, just look at Luke, who started up Proxy Picks.
Yeah, Luke Tomaszewski.
He's one of the youngest guys from 20 years ago. Looked like the teenager who was sitting there at the trade shows, and he's trying to meet and greet everybody. And he's a good example of the power of networking and meeting people there. And he now has this very, very successful company on Proxy Picks. I haven't talked to him in a few years, but I'm proud of the guy. I like what he's done. That just shows you that when you can network and you have the general knowledge and you want to automate and use technology to change the process, I think that's a great success story right there.
I completely agree with you on that one, Tom. And we bring towards wrapping things up, as we look towards next steps, and you're not leaving anytime soon, thank goodness. So people have the benefit of continuing to learn from you, and you continue to invest in others, which is such a wonderful trait and desire. What do you hope still to accomplish before your time comes to exit the industry or the industry exits you? We don't know Mother Nature's timing, but we all have an expiration date.
Yeah, we certainly do. My ultimate goal is to ride out the next 5 to 7 years until I actually retire. But besides the mentoring and the training right now, I'm looking forward to, I was just appointed to the Pearl Certification Committee. And so I'm working with Rick Heighton. And so I'm getting back involved as it comes to green and LEED and Pearl certifications for energy efficiencies and how to develop and work with figuring out the contributory value, solar panels, and high-end improvements on a property, because that's been a great disconnect for a long time. And finally, industry participants are all getting on track with that. To be part of that group I'm really looking forward to participating in that. And so that's one of the things.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
That's exciting, Tom. Well, I just want to say thank you again for thoughtfully and reflectively sharing on a near lifelong career in the appraisal industry with the early retirement and the work that you continue to do to support those that are in the industry or coming into it or have recently taken steps to advance their own professional education. So with that, again, we encourage everybody to, look for yourself at what's a possibility. As you heard Tom say, there are many avenues ahead. Technology obviously has a huge intersection with that. Embracing it is a faster pathway towards success than trying to hide out from it. So with that, again, Tom, thank you so much.
Anytime.
And we look forward to connecting with everybody next week.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Paru Zings, Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing life paths and achievements of our guests. Don't forget to like us on LinkedIn and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of Paru Zings, Appraisers on Purpose, create the change that you seek.